In this video we want to talk about current issues in HRM. The world of work is changing with the introduction of new government initiatives, globalisation and the economy. The world of work is changing rapidly because of technological change, because of the way we work and because of the requirements for flexibility within the workplace. Society is changing. There are more female workers now than probably ever, and they're playing an ever increasing role in industry, and quite rightly, because a lot of them have come out from universities with good qualifications, good skill sets, and they're making an impact in industry. So society is changing. People have a work balance life set of requirements that makes it difficult for industry to operate along old-fashioned traditional lines. Industry must be flexible also. So we have globalisation, the impact of greater information from different parts of the world, better communications channels and cheaper imports, which is putting competitive pressure on industry. And of course we have government initiatives to encourage more flexible working, more innovation within industry, more change. There are all sorts of pressures, and all of these really arrive on the desk of the HR management. These arrive for the HR people to deal with. They have to find strategies and ways in which to accommodate the need for change, the need for changing practices, working practices, the need for incorporating government requirements and initiatives, recognising the pressure from management to cope with issues associated with globalisation and increased competitiveness. So there are many aspects of the working situation that have changed and need attention. And this means that the role of the HR section has become crucial. It's crucial not just in facilitating the workers' experience of work and accommodating workers' requirements and management's requirements, but it's essential in trying to achieve corporate objectives also, to try and enable the workforce to achieve the skill sets that are required in modern working conditions. The Human Resource Department must be able to identify and work towards growing challenges that are impacting on employees and the world of work. The changes that we know that are going on around us, in the case of globalisation and technology and changing government requirements and so on, these changes are impacting on the employees and on the business, and the HR department must accommodate these. It must find ways through these conflicting sometimes requirements. It must find solutions that are acceptable on both sides. It must facilitate the requirements of the employees, or the employees may leave, taking with them valuable knowledge and know-how. Or they must meet the needs of the business, otherwise the business may not function efficiently. So there's a lot of pressure on the HR department to get it right. So the HR department must be willing to change and adapt to the changing needs of society. The HR department is not immune from what is happening. In fact, it's probably the first port of call in terms of change. The HR department must know what's happening in society, must know what's going on in the education sector, in the training sector, in industry itself, the types of workers that are available, the types of employees, the requirements of the employees. There are many aspects of employment that the HR department must be familiar with and must be up to date. The following are some of the topical issues impacting on HRM, and in fact these will constitute the rest of this particular talk. I'm just going to go through them in bullet points at the moment, but we will then deal with them in more detail. So globalization, we'll talk about all of these later, so I'll just go through the list. Globalization, workplace diversity and discrimination, changing skills requirements, training and development, recruitment, changing nature of work, employee voice, government policy. So we've identified 8 topical issues that are impacting on the HR department. Well, we'll go through each of these and talk a bit more about them. But you can see just from the list that there are quite heavy pressures on the HR department to deal with many important issues and to try and get the balance between employee requirements on the one hand and corporate requirements on the other, trying to get that balance correct. Let's start by looking at globalization. Organizations today not only operate nationally but globally and in constant demand to gain competitive advantage. Companies are locked in a battle, a competitive battle. It's the nature of capitalism. We talk about the benefits of competition in terms of reduced prices, better quality, more pressure on organizations to meet customer expectations. But that's become increasingly complex with globalization, because now domestic producers face imports from overseas producers. So the marketplace has become much bigger and hence much more complicated. And there is a need for organizations to recruit staff with appropriate skills that are capable of producing to high standards which will, in a sense, take on or beat the cheaper imported products. The rise of multinational business has put new demands and pressures on HRM. There is a greater need to adapt to different cultures and different languages. Organizations may have connections with producers in other countries, or they may have production lines in other countries, or special relationships with organizations. But this means that the organization itself must be able to facilitate different working practices, different cultures, different language, different traditions. It must understand the culture of business elsewhere. So it's a lot more complex than it was in the past. In the past, perhaps it was a company dealing with regional demand, regions within a small country. But now it's a company dealing with global demand, and the producers are spread right throughout the world. So it's much more complex. Employees are required to undertake training in order to meet the demands of global integration. The HR department simply can't recruit employees and expect them to be able to compete effectively in this global marketplace. They must be trained to do so. They must understand the products that are coming in, the technicality of the products, the design, the marketing strategies that are being deployed. They must understand many aspects of the competitive environment. And to do that, they must be properly trained. So training is not a luxury. Training is a necessity to cope with the issues associated with globalization. And of course training is supplied by the HR department. Diversity and discrimination are also issues confronting the HR department. The rise of globalization has put pressure on HRMs to accommodate for diversity and discrimination legislation. The the workforce must be trained to deal with people of different cultures, in different areas, be able to accommodate different traditions. They must understand diversity, and they must be capable of looking at the diverse populations that they're working with, perhaps organizations overseas that they're working with. They must be able to look at these and take the strengths from them. They must be able to look for good working practices and facilitate good working practices amongst the operators within the company itself, based on their experience of working with others. So diversity can bring strength to the organization. But it's important that discrimination legislation is adhered to, that there is no prejudice in dealing with others. This is a commercial undertaking, and the management of the organization must look to the management of other organizations and the employees of other organizations as, in a sense, co-workers. They are all involved within the same marketplace. They all have the same pressures and the same interests and the same tensions. And there's no place for discrimination within that. So the letter of the law and the spirit of the law should be adhered to in terms of discrimination legislation and diversity. The UK is a multicultural society. There are many different cultures living in the UK, for example, from all over the world. And there's a growing need to ensure employees are not discriminated on the basis of their protected characteristics, a term which has been coined in the legal framework. Their protected characteristics being colour, religion, traditions, and so on. But it's important in a multicultural society, one recognising the fact that the society is composed of many different peoples from different traditions, different backgrounds, and so on, that there is no room in that society, both in terms of business, in terms of economics, or in terms of morality. There's no room for discrimination. There's no room for that sort of behaviour. With the introduction of new laws, there are more costs involved in the management of legislation and procedures. The fact is, for organisations with HR departments, the HR department must be up to date with the law and must understand what's been discussed and proposals that are about to be implemented or changes that are about to be implemented. It may mean that the HR department may need training itself, it may need updating, it may need expert advice, and all of that, of course, is costly. Changing skill requirements. Well, the move from an industrial sector to a service sector has resulted in the acquisition of specific skills sets. Now, there's been a very large change in, say, the UK society, moving from traditional manufacturing industry to services, towards banking, insurance, accountancy, marketing, but also hotels, restaurants, entertainment, culture. There's been a big move in terms of the productive base of the economy. And this means that there are new skills required. And it's important that the HR department are familiar with what's available in terms of skill training and what's required. So the HR department must be briefed properly by the organisation as to the type of worker that is required, the type of skills that's required. And it may be that the employees come in with generic skills, skills that have been picked up from education that could apply to any part of, let's say, the service sector. But the organisation must then train the employee in the skills required for that particular company and that particular sector. So it's important to make a distinction between generic skills and specific skills, company-specific skills. The change in jobs and types of skills required means HR has to invest more in training and development in order to retain skills. Once employees are in situ, once the employees are working for the organisation, the onus is on the HR department to make sure that skills are updated and that there are regular training events to ensure that the employees are capable of making contributions that will enable the organisation to compete effectively. So there's an ongoing requirement on the part of HR to ensure that the employees are up to date. The recruitment process must ensure that employees are recruited based on their skill level, capability and future potential. And that may hark back to what I was saying about discrimination and diversity earlier. There is no room here to discriminate. The issue confronting the HR department is to find the right people for the job, whatever their background. So it's looking at the appropriate skills levels of the employees, the type of applicants that are being attracted by the company, the generic skill sets that they have got, and their suitability for specific training for the organisation and for long-run engagement, because any money spent, any resource expended on employees to enable them to acquire the specific skills for the organisation, that is in a sense sunk. It's sunk capital. If the employee subsequently leaves, that's lost. So it's important, once a program of training has been designed around particular requirements and employees are trained, it's important to retain the employees, and that will require careful scrutiny of incentives, salaries, remuneration, terms of employment and so on. Training and development. Well, government programs such as Investors in People, this is an initiative in the UK. Government programs such as Investors in People were introduced to help employees develop skills and gain qualifications. There is a recognition on the part of the UK government that apprenticeships, on-the-job training and more vocational based training and skills are important in industry. It's not just a case of getting everybody a degree. Academic study is not suitable to all people. Some people have particular talents that need to be cultivated in different ways, perhaps by on-the-job training. So there was a need to recognise vocational training and the importance of vocational training. And companies play a large part in doing this. They enable the employees to pick up more specific skills, more practical skills perhaps, and get them approved, get a qualification based on the acquisition of those skills. As a HR department, identifying and assessing employee development is essential and is becoming a compulsory element in retraining staff. It's important that the HR department view the employees as a resource that can be moved, which is to the benefit of the employees. It enlarges their work, it enlarges their experiences, it gives them more motivation, more interest, but it also facilitates more productivity within the workplace. Key personnel are being retained and they are trained and they feel that they're more part of the organisation. So there's a role for HR in providing retraining and flexibility within the workplace. which will in turn lead to more loyalty and more retention of key personnel. Organisations now have to implement performance management systems to ensure adequate resources are in place to develop employees. It's important that the HR department monitor performance, perhaps by individual performance review exercises or by perhaps 6-monthly interviews with employees based on their expectations and based on what they've achieved and what they want to achieve, so that the HR have an up-to-date picture of the requirements of the employees, and also look at the requirements of the organisation and try to marry the two, try to join them up, so that there's more coherence in the management of the employees. The employees feel better, they're being listened to, they have an opportunity perhaps to train, to pick up new skills, and the management benefit, the organisation benefits, because it has a more flexible workforce and more interested workforce, one more committed to the organisation and to the objectives of the organisation. The HR department must also, of course, deal with recruitment. Recruitment and selection has become a complex procedure. Previously, sending a curriculum vitae, a CV, would be sufficient. People write an account of their educational background and their commercial experience and their work experience and so on, send it to an organisation, and they would be assessed on the basis of the CV. But now it's often the case that they may be required for psychometric testing, to test their skills in particular ways, to test their cognitive ability, to understand their problem-solving skills, to understand whether they are more academic or more vocational, or what sort of people are they. And the psychometric testing, although it's not a precise science, may indicate types of personality and the more suitable areas for employment for those applicants. So the type of recruitment exercise has also changed. Recruitment process has become an e-recruitment system where employees take part in online tests and activities in order to assess suitability for the job. It may be that they complete exercises online, complete tests online, for example. These are timed, and they complete the test and press a submit button, and it could be even marked by a piece of code as correct, incorrect, or whatever. So the recruitment process has become increasingly sophisticated. Recruitment is a costly procedure which requires a range of activities and legal requirements. Therefore, organisations prefer to retain and develop existing staff. As much as possible, organisations like to retain existing staff, not go through the process of recruitment. It's expensive. Testing is expensive, and placing advertisements and interviewing and probation, perhaps putting people on 6-monthly probation and review exercises, and then there's all the training and acculturation to get to know the organisation and the layout and where everything is and the types of personality involved, and it's a costly exercise. And for that reason, organisations prefer to retain existing staff if possible. There's the changing nature of work. People's perceptions on employment have changed. There's a growing demand in 0-hour flexible working and part-time contracts. Now, some of this is controversial. Some people don't want flexible hours or don't want 0-hour working contracts and so on. They don't want to sit around hoping they'll have a job today, because many people have bills to pay. They have a life to lead. They have obligations to their families. And just to be called in from now once in a while by organisations to do some work and get paid means that they don't have sufficient resources to look after themselves or their families or pay bills. So it is controversial. So when I say there's an increase in a growing demand, the growing demand may be by employers looking for people to work on this basis, but not necessarily by employees looking to work on that basis. There are flexible working arrangements that have become popular over the last few years. Flexible working suits many important segments of the labour market, particularly female workers who have family obligations or have competing demands on their time. They may wish to have flexible working. By and large, flexible workers tend not to be core workers. They tend to be flexible. They tend to be called in as and when the organisation requires them. But there is a changing nature of work. Many organisations now go for a small core of workers who are essential, who know the organisation, know the market, know the product, know the routines of the business. These are the core workers. These are critically important. And the flexible workers who are called in from time to time depending on the demand for the product or for the services of the organisation. There may also be contracted workers who are called in because of their expertise, perhaps expert financial people or accountants or solicitors or engineers or whoever. It's worth in this context to consult Handy's Shamrock organisation for a structure which will more fully develop what I'm saying here. Due to the UK economy, employment is high and retaining a long term. Employment tends to be high in some economies. The UK has done very well over the last decade, from about 2010, 2008, after the major financial problem. The UK economy has come back quite well, but the problem now is trying to retain core workers and to retrain the core workers so as they're up to date. And all countries are really facing the same issue. They are competing globally. They're competing also in terms of a changing technology, changing customer requirements, and an ever increasing competitive situation which puts pressure on prices. So there is a need in all economies for training and retraining and for the retention of key employees. Because of the nature of the economies and the way they have changed, and because of globalisation and changes in technology, there's never a threat of redundancy. Employees have to live with the fact that they could be made redundant because a new competitor comes on the scene, or a new technology which is labour saving and which will make their particular skills redundant. This will be developed perhaps. So there is an ever increasing set of worries almost that employees have to cope with. But there is a need for organisations to train and retrain, to retain key workers and to allay these threats by enabling the workforce to confront the competition, to deal with it, and to also be confident in the face of changing technology. So there's an ever increasing range of employment contracts that are required because of the flexibility that workers require. the idea of a standard employment contract no longer applies. There are a range of contracts, temporary, full-time. They can apply in different contexts. So there's more work for the HR department to ensure that the people working for the organisation are on the appropriate contracts. Now, employee voice. Well, employee voice is a concept of employee participation. Employees have a right to voice their opinions about any matters concerning their employment. It's not as if the employees should stay quiet and just passively accept whatever the organisation has set out for them, or whatever their conditions of employment is. The employees have a voice. They can approach the organisation through the HR department and voice their problems and their issues. So they have an opportunity to influence management decisions and play an active role in organisation performance. They may see the management making mistakes or bringing proposals which are unacceptable, not just from the perspective of the employee and how it will affect the employee, but maybe defective in some way, or which will be detrimental to the health of the organisation. Perhaps a change in the design of the product. The employee can voice their opinion and should be listened to. The concept can be applied individually or collectively. For example, grievances, disputes, collective bargaining, democracy agreements between trade unions and employee representatives. So the employee voice may come through in a variety of channels, in a variety of ways. It may be the individual approaching the HR department and voicing concerns over something, over a management decision to change something or to introduce something. Or it may come through organised labour, through a trade union, and it may express concerns over some particular course of action. But again, it's the HR department who will deal with this. Government policy. Well, changing government policy has an impact on HR. Organisations must adapt to changing external pressures. The government is constantly reviewing industrial practices. There's a minister for business in the UK whose job it is to ensure that the UK is competitive and that technology is being introduced and training programs are in place, and different government departments will collaborate to try and produce training and vocational qualifications and so on to try and improve the competitive position of the country and of the individual businesses. But of course, the HR department must be familiar with all of this and must be able to participate and contribute and also benefit from the government initiatives. Policies such as increasing the age of retirement and state pension instability means that HR is to accommodate employees working at older age. So perhaps the age profile of the workers has increased because older people wish to stay on in employment. Older workers may have different requirements. So the onus is on the HR department to accommodate these workers. State pension instability means that an organisation is more inclined to offer a private pension for their employees, and the terms of the private pension will involve HR, and it will involve the HR explaining this to the employees. Again, a bigger role for HR. So what we've seen in this video is just some of the many different functions that are performed by the HR department. The working environment is becoming increasingly complex. There's the influence of government, there's globalisation, changing technology, there's a changing culture, which means that more flexibility may be required by the workers because of changes in society. There may be a need for more training. There is a need to top up generic skills with specific skills. There's an aging workforce, and so on. So the role of the HR department has become increasingly complex. And that's what this video was trying to do, was trying to discuss some of the complexities that are taken on board by the HR department. It's worth going back over the video, making a note of some of the headings that appear in the video and making some brief notes, because these are the issues that the HR department face and are likely to continue to face into the future. In fact, there may be additional pressures on HR as greater globalisation kicks in and perhaps even more advanced technologies come into play in the industrial and commercial sectors. So make notes of the various points and have these available for assessment and for just generally understanding the role of the HR and the importance of HR within business. But that's all we're going to look at in this session, so we'll leave it at that and say thank you for watching.